The fever had been building for 3 days, and by the fourth morning Catherine Brennan could no longer tell whether the sun streaming through her cabin window was real or another hallucination dancing across her burning vision. She had been alone on her homestead outside of Abilene, Kansas for 6 months now, ever since her father had died from a heart ailment that took him swift and sudden one morning while checking the cattle. It was 1878, and women running their own spreads were rare enough to raise eyebrows, but Catherine had inherited her father's stubborn streak, along with his 160 acres. She had managed through spring and summer well enough, tending the small herd, maintaining the fences, keeping the vegetable garden alive against the relentless prairie sun. But now, in early September, her body had betrayed her. It had started as a simple chill, the kind that made her pull her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Then came the aches that settled deep into her bones, followed by a heat that seemed to radiate from her very core. By the third day, she could barely make it from her bed to the water bucket. By the fourth, she had stopped trying. Catherine lay on the narrow bed her father had built, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her nightgown soaked through. The quilts had been kicked to the floor hours ago, or maybe it was days. Time had become a fluid thing, bending and stretching in ways that made no sense. She thought she heard voices sometimes, her mother calling her name, her father telling her to get up and tend to the chickens, but both her parents were dead, and the chickens were probably scattered to the winds by now. The door to the cabin hung slightly ajar. She had a vague memory of opening it, desperate for air when the fever had spiked in the night. Or had that been a dream too? Miles away, riding across the prairie with his horse's hooves beating a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth, Cole Dawson was thinking about water. The creek that usually ran through the Brennan property was one of the few reliable sources for Miles, and his canteen had run dry an hour back. He was a ranch hand for the Double H spread 20 miles west, and had been sent to check on some cattle that had wandered off during the last storm. At 26 years old, Cole had been working cattle since he was tall enough to sit a horse properly. He knew every homestead, every creek, every stand of trees in this part of Kansas. He also knew that old Patrick Brennan had died earlier that year, leaving his daughter to manage alone. Cole had met Catherine exactly twice, both times in town when she had come in for supplies. She had been polite but distant, her green eyes wary of the attention she drew as a young woman on her own. Cole had touched his hat brim to her and moved on, respecting her clear desire for privacy. But as he approached the Brennan homestead now, something felt wrong. The chickens were scratching around the yard in a frantic, unfed way. The small vegetable garden looked parched, and the front door of the cabin stood open, swaying slightly in the warm breeze. Cole slowed his horse, a roan gelding named Rusty, and dismounted with the easy grace of long practice. He tied the reins loosely to the fence post and approached the cabin cautiously. "Miss Brennan?" he called out. "Ma'am, you there? It's Cole Dawson from the Double H." No answer came, just the rustle of wind through the prairie grass and the distant call of a hawk. Cole stepped up onto the small porch, his boots thudding against the weathered wood. "Miss Brennan, I'm coming in. Just want to make sure everything's all right." The interior of the cabin was dim after the bright sunlight outside. It took a moment for Cole's eyes to adjust, and when they did, his heart kicked hard against his ribs. Catherine Brennan lay on the bed against the far wall, her face flushed scarlet with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. Even from the doorway, he could see the tremors that shook her slender frame. He crossed the cabin in 3 long strides and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. She was burning up, her skin so hot it nearly shocked him. "Jesus," he muttered, then louder, "Miss Brennan, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, but they were glassy and unfocused. "Papa?" she whispered, her voice raw and cracked. "Papa, the cattle are out again." "No, ma'am, it's Cole Dawson. You're sick. You have a fever." He looked around the cabin quickly, taking inventory. There was a pump inside, thank God, which meant he would not have to leave her to fetch water. A basin sat on a small table near the stove. Clean cloths hung on a line near the window. Cole moved fast. He pumped water into the basin, grabbed the cloths, and returned to Catherine's side. She was muttering now, words tumbling out in a disconnected stream. Something about fixing the fence, about needing to get to town before winter, about her mother's recipe for preserves. "Easy now," Cole said softly, wringing out one of the cloths and laying it gently across her forehead. She flinched at the touch, crying out softly, but he persisted. "I know it feels cold, but it will help. You have got to get this fever down." He worked methodically, the way he might work with a spooked horse or a wounded calf. One cloth on her forehead, another at the back of her neck. He soaked them again when they grew warm, the water in the basin gradually heating from her body's fire. Catherine twisted beneath his ministrations, sometimes fighting him, sometimes going limp, and still in a way that scared him more than her struggles. "Stay with me," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Come on now. You are tougher than this. I've seen you haul feed sacks in town. You are strong." The afternoon wore on. Cole lost track of time as he tended to her, cooling cloth after cooling cloth, holding a tin cup of water to her cracked lips and coaxing her to swallow. Most of it ran down her chin, but some made it down her throat. It was enough. As evening began to fall, painting the cabin in shades of gold and amber, Catherine's breathing finally began to slow. The flush in her cheeks faded from scarlet to rose. When Cole pressed his hand to her forehead again, the heat had diminished, still present but no longer the raging inferno it had been. He sat back in the chair he had pulled up beside the bed, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion. His shirt was damp with sweat and water from the wrung-out cloths. His back ached from bending over her for hours. But she was cooler. She was going to be all right, going to be. Catherine's eyes opened slowly, and for the first time they seemed to truly see him. "Who?" she started, then coughed, the sound dry and painful. "Hold on." Cole reached for the water cup and helped her sit up just enough to drink. This time she managed several swallows before collapsing back against the pillow. "Who are you?" she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cole Dawson, ma'am. I work at the Double H. I was passing by and saw your door open. You have been very sick." She closed her eyes again, and for a moment he thought she had slipped back into unconsciousness. But then she spoke, so quietly he had to lean in to hear. "How long?" "I do not know how long you have been sick, but I have been here since late morning. It is evening now." "You stayed." It was not quite a question, more a statement of wonder. "Could not very well leave you like that," Cole said, feeling suddenly awkward. "You were burning up. I had to get the fever down." A single tear slid from the corner of her eye, tracking down her temple into her hair. "Thank you." Cole cleared his throat. "You need broth, something to build your strength back up, and more water. When did you last eat?" Catherine tried to remember, but the days had blurred together. "I do not know. There is salt pork in the larder, some beans." "All right, I will fix something up. You just rest." Cole stood, his knees protesting after so long in the chair. He found the larder exactly where any sensible homesteader would put it. Cool and dark in the northwest corner of the cabin, the salt pork was there, along with a sack of beans, some cornmeal, and a few precious potatoes. He set about making a simple broth, slicing the pork thin and setting it to boil with water and a pinch of salt he found in a small ceramic jar. While the broth cooked, Cole went outside to tend to Rusty and check on the animals. The chickens needed feed and water, which he provided from the stores in the small barn. There were 3 cows in a pen behind the cabin, lowing with discomfort at not being milked. He took care of that too, though it had been a while since he had hand-milked, and his technique was rusty. The cows did not seem to mind. By the time he returned to the cabin, the broth was ready, and the light outside had faded to deep purple. Cole lit the oil lamp on the table and carried a bowl of broth to Catherine's bedside. She was awake, watching him with those sharp green eyes that seemed clearer now, more focused. "Can you sit up?" he asked. "I think so." With his help, she managed to prop herself against the pillows he stacked behind her. Her hands shook when she reached for the bowl, so Cole held it for her, spooning the hot broth to her lips. She ate slowly, pausing often, but she finished half the bowl before waving him away. "That is enough," she said. "Thank you." Cole set the bowl aside and studied her in the lamplight. Even sick and exhausted, she was beautiful. Her dark hair fell in waves around her face, and her eyes held an intelligence and strength that drew him. He pushed the thought away. She was a woman alone, vulnerable, and he was here to help, not to entertain inappropriate thoughts. "You should not be out here alone," he said, then immediately regretted the words. He sounded like every other man who had probably told her that, but Catherine did not bristle. She just nodded slowly. "I know, but I have nowhere else to go. This land is all I have left of my family." "Family is important," Cole agreed, "but staying alive is more important. What if I had not come by?" "Then I suppose I would have died," she said simply. "But you did come by, and I am grateful." They sat in silence for a moment, the lamp flickering between them. Finally, Cole said, "I should stay tonight. Make sure the fever does not come back. I can sleep in the barn, keep it proper." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but there is a bedroll you can use on the floor. The barn is full of mice." Cole smiled despite himself. "Floor it is, then." That night, Cole lay on the bedroll Catherine had directed him to, staring up at the dark ceiling and listening to her breathe. The sound was steady now, peaceful, so different from the labored gasps of the afternoon. He had not expected his day to end like this, playing nursemaid to a woman he barely knew. But life on the frontier was like that, unpredictable and demanding. What surprised him more was that he did not mind. In fact, lying there in the darkness, with Catherine sleeping a few feet away, Cole felt something he had not felt in a long time. A sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cabin window. Cole woke to find Catherine already awake, propped up on her pillows and watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Good morning," he said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "How are you feeling?" "Weak," she admitted, "but better. The fever broke in the night. I woke up soaked through." She gestured to her nightgown, and Cole noticed for the first time that she had changed into a dry one. "That is good. That means the worst is past." He stood and stretched, feeling every one of his 26 years in his stiff muscles. "I will make some breakfast, then I need to get back to the Double H, but I will come back tomorrow to check on you." "You do not have to do that," Catherine said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "I know I do not have to, but I am going to." Cole moved to the stove and started building up the fire. "You have been very sick. You need help until you are back on your feet." Over breakfast, simple cornmeal mush with a little of the fresh milk, they talked. Catherine told him about her father, about how they'd come to Kansas from Missouri 5 years ago, following the promise of land and a fresh start. Her mother had died of cholera on the journey west, leaving just Catherine and her father to build the homestead from nothing. Cole told her about his own past, growing up in Texas until his parents had died in a Comanche raid when he was 15. He had drifted north, working ranches and learning the cattle trade until he had landed at the Double H 3 years ago. He had no family left, no ties to anywhere in particular. "So we are both orphans," Catherine said softly. "Seems that way." Cole met her eyes across the small table. "But that does not mean we have to be alone." Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition. A possibility. But Cole stood before it could become anything more. "I will be back tomorrow," he said, grabbing his hat from the peg by the door. "You rest and keep drinking water and eat. You need to rebuild your strength." "Cole," Catherine said as he reached the door. He turned back. "Thank you. Truly, I would not have made it without you." "Yes, you would have," he said with a small smile. "You are tougher than you think, Miss Brennan." Catherine, she corrected. If you are going to keep coming back, you might as well call me Catherine. Catherine, he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. I will see you tomorrow, Catherine. Cole rode back to the Double H with his mind full of green eyes and dark hair, of a woman alone on the prairie with more courage than half the men he knew. He reported into the ranch foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Tom who had been working cattle since before Cole was born. Found those stray cattle? Tom asked, looking up from the tally sheet he was working on. No, sir, got sidetracked. Catherine Brennan, over at the old Brennan place, she was sick with fever. Spent the day getting it down. Tom's bushy eyebrows rose. That so? She all right now? Fever broke last night, but she is weak. I told her I would check back tomorrow. Decent of you, Tom said, then fixed Cole with a knowing look. Pretty thing, Miss Brennan, if I recall. Cole felt heat rise in his face. That has got nothing to do with it. She needed help. Never said it did, Tom replied mildly. But seeing as how we are light on work this week, waiting on that buyer from Topeka, I suppose I can spare you for a few days. Check on the lady. Make sure she's all right. Neighborly thing to do. Thank you, sir. Just do not forget you work for me, not for her, Tom added, with a grin that suggested he did not believe for a moment that this was purely about neighborly concern. Cole rode back to Catherine's homestead the next morning with supplies. More cornmeal, some dried apples, a tin of peaches that had cost him 2 days' wages at the general store. When he arrived, he found her up and dressed, moving slowly around the cabin as she tried to straighten up. You should be resting, he said, dismounting and carrying the supplies inside. I have been resting, Catherine said, but he could see the exhaustion in her face the way she leaned against the table for support. I cannot just lie in bed forever. There's work to do. The work will wait. You will not heal if you push yourself too hard. Cole set the supplies down and guided her back to the bed, ignoring her protests. Sit, rest, let me handle things for a few hours. I cannot ask you to do that. You're not asking, I am offering. He smiled at her. Besides, Tom gave me a few days off. I might as well be useful. So Cole spent that day and the next and the one after that at the Brennan homestead, doing the work that needed doing. He mended the fence where the wire had come loose. He hauled water for the garden and the animals. He chopped wood for the stove and cleaned out the barn and fixed the shutter that had been hanging crooked on the cabin window. And every day Catherine grew a little stronger. By the 4th day, she was up and moving around the cabin with more confidence, cooking meals, and insisting that she was well enough to manage on her own. I am sure you are needed back at the Double H, she said as they ate dinner together that evening, fried salt pork and beans with cornbread that Catherine had made. You have done so much already. I have a few more days, Cole said, not quite meeting her eyes. The truth was he did not want to leave. In the past 4 days, he had come to look forward to these evenings sitting across the table from Catherine, talking about everything and nothing. She was smart and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard. She knew cattle and horses and the hard work of homesteading, but she also loved books and had read everything from Shakespeare to Dickens. Why did you really stay? Catherine asked suddenly. That first day. You could have ridden for help, brought back a doctor or a neighbor, but you stayed and tended to me yourself. Why? Cole considered the question, trying to find words for something he did not fully understand himself. I guess, he said slowly, I guess I knew that by the time I got help, it might have been too late. And the thought of you being alone, burning up with fever with no one to help you. He shook his head. I could not do it. Could not leave you like that. You do not even know me, Catherine pointed out, but her voice was soft, wondering. No, Cole agreed, but I would like to, if you would let me. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Catherine set down her fork, her green eyes locked on his. I would like that too, she said quietly. Cole reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Catherine placed her hand in his. Her fingers were still too thin, her grip weaker than it should be, but to Cole it felt like the most perfect thing in the world. "I will come back," he said, "even after you are well, if you want me to." "I want you to," Catherine said and smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Over the following weeks, Cole became a regular presence at the Brennan homestead. He would ride over after finishing his work at the Double H, timing his arrival for early evening when the worst heat of the day had passed. Sometimes he brought supplies, sometimes just himself. They would work together on the endless tasks that came with maintaining a homestead, and then they would sit on the porch as the sun set, talking and watching the prairie turn purple and gold in the fading light. Catherine told him about her dreams, about wanting to expand the herd, maybe get some sheep as well. She wanted to build a bigger barn, plant an orchard. She spoke of these plans with a passion that made Cole want to help her achieve every one of them. Cole told her about his dreams too, dreams he had barely admitted to himself before. He wanted a place of his own someday, a ranch where he could raise cattle and horses. He wanted stability, a home, maybe a family. He had spent so many years drifting that the idea of putting down roots had seemed impossible. But sitting next to Catherine on the porch of her cabin, it started to seem not just possible, but inevitable. They grew closer as September turned to October. There were small touches that lingered longer than necessary, glances that said more than words. Cole found himself thinking about Catherine during the day when he was working, counting the hours until he could ride over to see her. And Catherine found herself listening for the sound of Rusty's hooves in the evening, her heart lifting when Cole appeared on the horizon. It was a cool October evening when things finally shifted between them. They had spent the day repairing a section of the barn roof that had been damaged in a windstorm, and Catherine had insisted on helping despite Cole's protests. She was fully recovered now, her strength returned, and she clambered up the ladder with the confidence of someone who had been doing this kind of work all her life. But when they were done, standing in the barn and brushing the dust and straw from their clothes, Catherine lost her balance slightly on the uneven floor. Cole caught her instinctively, his hands on her waist, steadying her. And then they were standing so close, closer than they had ever been. And Cole could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could count the freckles across her nose. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough. "Yes," she breathed. And it was answer and permission and plea all at once. Cole kissed her then, gentle and searching, and Catherine kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for weeks now. Maybe since that first day when I saw you lying there burning up with fever, and all I could think was that I could not let you slip away." Catherine's hands came up to frame his face, her thumbs brushing against his cheekbones. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. It seemed too fast, too impossible, but I cannot help it. When you are here, everything feels right. When you are gone, I am just counting the hours until you come back." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They were two people who had been alone too long, who had found in each other something they had not even known they were looking for. Later, sitting on the porch steps with Catherine tucked against his side, Cole said, "Marry me." Catherine pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I know it is fast. I know people will talk, but I do not care. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. I want to help you build this place into everything you have dreamed of. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. Marry me, Catherine." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, but she was smiling, that brilliant smile that made Cole's heart skip. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Abilene, in the small church where Catherine's father had attended services. It was a simple ceremony with few guests, just some folks from town who had known Patrick Brennan and Tom, and a few other hands from the Double H. Catherine wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk. The white lace yellowed slightly with age, but still beautiful. Cole wore his best shirt and a new vest he had bought for the occasion, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, He kissed his bride with a joy that made the small congregation chuckle and applaud. They honeymooned at the homestead, which was now their home together. Cole moved his few belongings from the bunkhouse at the Double H, and Tom gave him his blessing along with a stern warning not to be a stranger. "You ever need work, you come see me," Tom said, shaking Cole's hand. "You are a good hand and a good man, but I am glad you found something more than just work." Life settled into a new rhythm. Cole and Catherine worked the homestead together, building it up bit by bit. Cole brought his expertise with cattle, and the small herd grew. They added chickens and 3 pigs, and in the spring they planted a bigger garden. Cole built a new barn, bigger and sturdier than the old one, and Catherine started her orchard, planting apple and cherry saplings that would not bear fruit for years but represented hope for the future. They learned each other in the way that newlyweds do, discovering preferences and quirks and the small irritations that come with sharing a life. Cole learned that Catherine was cheerful in the mornings but moody in the evenings when she was tired. Catherine learned that Cole was terrible at cooking but could fix anything with his hands, and that he hummed tunelessly when he was concentrating on a task. But mostly they learned that they had been right to take this leap. They fit together in a way that felt both comfortable and exciting, and they worked well as partners, dividing tasks based on strength and skill rather than rigid ideas about men's work and women's work. And at night, in the bed they shared, they came together with a passion that never seemed to diminish. A year after their wedding, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be sure before telling Cole. When she finally did, over dinner one evening, Cole's face went through such a rapid series of emotions, shock and joy and terror and wonder that Catherine could not help but laugh. "Are you all right?" she asked, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I am going to be a father," Cole said, his voice full of awe. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Catherine confirmed, squeezing his hand. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Cole stood and came around the table, pulling Catherine into his arms. "I am terrified and thrilled and more in love with you than I thought possible. Of course I am happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, unable to keep down much food. Cole hovered anxiously, trying to help even when there was nothing to be done but wait for the sickness to pass. As her belly grew, Catherine found it harder to do the physical work of the homestead, and Cole took on more of the burden, insisting that she rest. "I am pregnant, not broken," Catherine protested, but she was secretly grateful for his care. The truth was, she was exhausted most of the time, her body pouring all its energy into growing the child within her. In early June, as the prairie grasses grew tall and green, and wildflowers bloomed in brilliant patches of color, Catherine went into labor. Cole rode for the doctor in town and for the nearest neighbor woman, Mrs. Howell, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he paced the porch while Catherine labored inside, feeling utterly useless. Mrs. Howell came out periodically with updates, her round face kind but serious. "She is doing fine. These things take time, especially with a first baby." Cole nodded and resumed his pacing. He had faced down angry bulls, ridden through lightning storms, survived more dangers than he could count, but nothing had prepared him for the terror of knowing Catherine was in pain, and there was nothing he could do to help her. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, a baby's cry pierced the evening air. Cole froze, his heart hammering, until Mrs. Howell appeared in the doorway with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy boy, and your wife is tired but well. You can come in now." Cole entered the cabin on shaking legs to find Catherine propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiantly happy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket Catherine had sewn during the long winter months. As Cole approached, Catherine pulled back the blanket to reveal a small, scrunched-up face, eyes closed, one tiny fist waving in the air. "This is your papa," Catherine whispered to the baby. Then, looking up at Cole with tears streaming down her face, "This is our son." Cole sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and reached out with one tentative finger to touch the baby's hand. The tiny fingers immediately closed around his, gripping with surprising strength, and Cole felt something in his chest crack open, a well of love so deep it overwhelmed him. "He is perfect," Cole whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "It is real," Catherine said softly. "This is our family." They named the boy Patrick, after Catherine's father, and he proved to be a healthy, loud baby who demanded attention at all hours. Cole and Catherine stumbled through those early months of parenthood in a fog of sleeplessness and constant worry, but also with a joy that suffused even the most exhausting moments. Cole would hold Patrick in the evenings, walking back and forth across the cabin while Catherine rested, and sing to him in a low voice. He sang old cowboy songs and hymns he half remembered from childhood, and Patrick would quiet, his dark eyes, so like his mother's, studying his father's face with intense concentration. Catherine would nurse the baby and watch her husband with a fullness in her heart that sometimes frightened her with its intensity. She had never imagined this life, this happiness. There had been times during those fever-struck days 2 years ago when she had been ready to give up, to let the heat and the loneliness consume her. But Cole had found her. He had cooled her burning body and warmed her lonely heart. And now look at what they had built together. The years passed with the steady rhythm of life on the prairie. Patrick grew into a sturdy toddler who loved following his father around the homestead, trying to help with chores on unsteady legs. 2 years after Patrick was born, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, after Cole's mother. And 3 years after that, another daughter arrived, red-faced and screaming, whom they named Sarah. The homestead grew as the family did. Cole and Catherine expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms so the children would have space to grow. The herd increased year by year, and they bought more land when the adjoining property came up for sale. Catherine's orchard began to produce fruit, and she started making preserves and pies that became famous in Abilene. They had hard years too, times when the rain did not come and the crops withered, times when illness swept through the herd or a hard winter killed half their cattle, but they weathered those storms together, supporting each other, making the hard decisions that came with trying to survive on the frontier. Through it all, the love between Cole and Catherine never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, enriched by the shared experiences of building a life together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when they could steal a moment away from the children, watching the sun set over the prairie and talking about their dreams. Many of those early dreams had come true, others had been replaced by new ones, but always they faced the future together. On their 10th anniversary, Cole gave Catherine a gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was a painting, crude because he had no real skill with a brush, but heartfelt. It showed the cabin as it had been when he first found her, door hanging open, looking small and lonely on the vast prairie, and standing in the doorway, barely visible in the painting's perspective, was a figure meant to be him. "This is the day my life really started," Cole said as Catherine studied the painting with tears in her eyes. "The day I found you. I was just drifting before that, going through the motions. But when I stepped into that cabin and saw you there, something in me knew. This is what I have been looking for. This is home." Catherine set the painting aside carefully and pulled her husband into a fierce embrace. "You saved my life that day. I was dying, Cole, and you brought me back." "No," Cole said, pulling back to look into her eyes, still as green and captivating as they had been that first day. "We saved each other." The children grew. Patrick proved to have his father's way with animals and his mother's head for business, and by the time he was 15, he was managing much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Eleanor was quieter, bookish like her mother, and spent her free time reading everything she could get her hands on. Sarah was the wild one, always climbing trees and racing her horse across the prairie, giving her parents equal measures of pride and anxiety. As Cole and Catherine entered their 40s, the homestead they had built together had become one of the most prosperous ranches in the county, but more than that, It had become a home filled with love and laughter, with the sound of children playing and the smell of Catherine's cooking and the sight of Cole walking in from the fields at sunset. They added grandchildren to the family as the years continued to pass. Patrick married a girl from town named Anna, and they had 3 children who spent summers at the ranch learning to ride and work cattle. Eleanor surprised everyone by falling in love with a traveling preacher, and they settled in Abilene where Eleanor taught school. Sarah, true to her independent nature, married late, choosing a fellow rancher who matched her spirit and strength. Cole and Catherine grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering into comfortable lines. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who had ridden up to a lonely homestead one September day, and the young woman burning with fever who had stolen his heart. On a warm June evening, with the prairie alive with birdsong and the setting sun painting the sky in glorious color, Cole and Catherine sat on the porch of the home they had built. Their children and grandchildren were inside, gathered for a Sunday dinner that had become a monthly tradition. The sounds of conversation and laughter drifted through the open windows. "Do you ever think about that day?" Catherine asked, her hand in Cole's, their fingers intertwined as they had been countless times over the decades. "The day you found me?" "Every day," Cole said honestly. "Every single day I thank God that I decided to ride this way, that I stopped to check on you. My whole life hung on that moment, though I did not know it then." "Mine too," Catherine said softly. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and Cole pressed a kiss to her silver hair. "I was so alone, Cole, so scared. And then you walked through that door and everything changed." "I love you," Cole said, the words as true and necessary now as they had been when he first spoke them in the barn 40 years ago. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, their family's voices a warm backdrop. The homestead stretched out before them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and stubborn determination. The land that had once been Catherine's burden was now a legacy, something to pass on to their children and grandchildren. But more than the land, more than the success of the ranch, their true legacy was the love they had built together. A love that had started with a fevered woman and a cowboy who refused to leave her side. A love that had grown through hardship and joy, through the everyday moments that make up a life. A love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the children they had raised and the example they had set. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the vast Kansas sky, Cole and Catherine rose from the porch and went inside to join their family. There was laughter and food and stories, the kind of evening that would be remembered fondly in years to come. And through it all, Cole and Catherine stayed close, their hands finding each other across the crowded table, their eyes meeting with the understanding of 2 people who had truly become one. The fever that had nearly killed Catherine all those years ago had instead become the catalyst for the greatest blessing of both their lives. In cooling her burning body, Cole had warmed her heart. In opening her eyes to find him there, Catherine had given Cole a reason to stop drifting and start living. Together they had built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch, but a genuine partnership, a deep and abiding love that had sustained them through everything life on the frontier had thrown at them. Years later, when Cole finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Catherine was holding his hand. She grieved deeply, as one does when losing half of their soul. But she did not despair. How could she when they had been given so much? So many years, so much love, such a beautiful life together. Catherine lived another 5 years, spending her final days surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of the love story that had started on a hot September day in 1878. She told the story often to anyone who would listen, about the cowboy who had found her delirious with fever and had stayed to cool her down, about how his gentleness and care had not just saved her life, but had given her a reason to live it fully. When Catherine passed away at the age of 76, she was buried next to Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their graves were marked with simple stones bearing their names and dates, but also with an inscription that Patrick had chosen: "Together always." The ranch continued on, passed down through generations, each adding their own chapters to the story. But those who worked the land and lived in the expanded house never forgot the two people who had started it all. The story of Catherine and Cole became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about love, yes, but also about courage and perseverance, about two lonely people finding each other and building something lasting, about the way a single act of kindness and a refusal to abandon someone in need can change the course of multiple lives. The land that Catherine had once struggled to maintain alone became a thriving legacy. The cabin where Cole had found her delirious with fever was preserved as part of the main house, its original walls kept as a reminder of where it all began. And on warm summer evenings, when the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset over the prairie, they would sometimes imagine they could see two figures sitting together, hands intertwined, watching the same endless sky that had witnessed the beginning of their remarkable love story. The fever had brought them together, but love had kept them there, building a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream during those early, uncertain days. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land, or the prosperity, or even the children and grandchildren, though all of those mattered. The greatest legacy was the proof that love, real and true and steadfast, could flourish even in the harsh environment of the frontier, that two people committed to each other could weather any storm and build something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Catherine and Cole's story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of showing up when someone needs help, and the extraordinary things that can happen when two hearts find each other against all odds. Their love story, which began with a cowboy cooling down a fevered woman in a lonely homestead, rippled outward through time, touching everyone who heard it and reminding them that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of human kindness.